Welcome to Detour 365, episode 41. And it's been a few weeks, but we are back and looking at the book of Job. We're sticking with our series we've been on, Humanity of God, but we are into Job now. We were in Exodus. We're Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. And Job is an interesting book, as we've just been discussing. I'm joined by Bill for this episode, and Job's considered a wisdom book, but it's also a narrative. It's also a story, and there are many applications, of course, for our lives and how our relationship with God and how we deal with the different things that happen, and there's so many paths to go down with this, but we're going to, in our passages that we look at from Job, we're going to stick with the theme that we're looking at. And in this case, in Job chapter 1, we have this divine counsel, and God relating. We see God as a relational being, and also that we sort of get this picture of this bigger, a bigger picture, or the biggest picture of the spiritual war that is happening behind the scenes. And of course, the main character in the book of Job is Job, and Job is going through a lot, as we will see, but initially he doesn't have an awareness of all of this that is happening in the spiritual realm. He is experiencing the consequences of it, but we, of course, because we're reading this, we have this view of everything, and we can see what is actually happening. So that's kind of something to remember there. But we are introduced to the man Job in this first chapter, and then we are introduced to this divine counsel with we'll go ahead and read, and we will see exactly what this is all about. And we're reading Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. Bill is reading from the CJB.
There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. He owned 9,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 pairs of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, as well as a great number of servants, so that he was the wealthiest man in the East. It was the custom of his sons to give banquets, each on his set day in his own house, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. After a cycle of banquets, Job would send for them to come and be consecrated. Then he would get up early in the morning and offer burnt offerings for each of them, because Job said, "My sons might have sinned and blasphemed gods in their thoughts." This is what Job did every time. It happened one day that the sons of God came to serve Adonai, and among them came the adversary. Adonai asked the adversary, "Where are you coming from?" The adversary answered Adonai, "From roaming through the earth, wandering here and there." Adonai asked the adversary, "Did you notice my servant Job, that there's no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil?" The adversary answered Adonai, Is it for nothing that Job fears God? You've put a protective hedge around him, his house, and everything he has. You've prospered his work, and his livestock are spread out all over the land. But if you reach out in your hand and touch whatever he has, without a doubt, he'll curse you to your face. Adonai said to the adversary, Here, everything he has is in your hands, except that you are not to lay a finger on his person. Then the adversary went out from the presence of Adonai.
All right. A good reading of that, indeed. And I have Uz as the land. That when you said Utz, that reminded me of that. Isn't that like a snack mix or something
I have no idea.
that you can buy? It's like anyway. Uh and I don't think I think we have some ideas about where Job might have been. I believe I've heard sort of like modern day Persia, that kind of area as a possibility. Um, there are some passages in Job where it mentions like snow melting and different things that kind of hint at it being in certain places, but it is kind of vague, and perhaps that's intentional that we are supposed to see ourselves, even though we might not be as wealthy as Job. um, we are supposed to kind of see ourselves in this story, and I think that is the case. I do believe that Job was a real person, um, but we're not really given a lot of detail about when he lived, where specifically he lived, and um, where was the land of Uz exactly. So it's intriguing, but again, I do believe that he was a real person. There's a lot in this story that is very well, that we can certainly apply to our lives, and we kind of introduce some of those themes, that there is this greater reality out there that we might not always, I mean, we usually don't see it, but it's kind of this and I'm drawing a blank on the name. I was going to look it up, but the guy that wrote The Unseen Realm and made the you heard of him?
Oh, yeah. I
There's a
can't remember.
documentary, and but he goes into talking about this divine council, and it's definitely not for, I believe it is based on it does have solid grounding in what the Bible teaches, but it's also, if you're not ready to receive it, it might be kind of difficult to process it. The whole idea of God dealing with creating beings with whom he has a counsel, and has this sort of, well, I mean, God created us for a relationship. So, God is relational. There is one God, but also you have these sons of God that it mentions here, that says present themselves before the Lord. And also, one of the weirdest things about this story is that, it says that Satan, or you have the accuser, or
Adversary.
the adversary, yeah, also appears among them. So God apparently allows this to happen, which brings up some questions. And I mean, obviously, God would not be threatened by the presence of the adversary. And it is
Of course
clear,
not.
yeah, and it is clear in the story that God is in control of the situation. Um, and when I used to read this section, every time the adversary would come into the picture, and I believe it happens twice where he says, like, well, Job doesn't, Job's just following you because you give him good things. And in this case, it's, stretch out your hand and touch all that is his. And then the next case, it's stretch out your hand and touch, give him poor health. And, he breaks out into, I think, boils. And it's really kind of a very uncomfortable situation for Job because his health goes and he's kind of near death. And um but initially when I first read the book of Job, I would think that, why does God think that he has to prove something to the adversary or Satan or whoever it is, this um and I don't believe that that is the case. God is relating to these beings, but I believe we're given this story. Well, the only reason we're given this story is that it gives us some sort of insight into our relationship with God. So I believe that is the point of this story, is for it to be given to us. Not that God had to prove something uh, to the adversary or to Satan, because God certainly didn't have to prove anything to this entity, or to anybody. God doesn't have to prove anything to anybody. Um,
Well, that's true.
you know, um, so I don't see it as an ego thing. I um, I do see it as even though there are a lot of questions that we get from reading the book of Job, and we'll see that as we go through it, they're very often, well, a lot of people have that question of, why do bad things happen to good people? And that's kind of a simplified version of the question. But like, if I'm doing everything right, why does, Job was a guy that kind of seemed to try to do everything right. I mean, he wasn't perfect, he was still human, but all this kind of came out of nowhere, and it wasn't because of anything that he did. Um, the friends who will come into the picture later on will make that accusation. They'll say that Job must have done something terrible for this judgment to be, for him to be experiencing this judgment. And he loses his family, he loses his property, he loses all his people that are working for him. He, kind of a spoiler alert there, but that all happens. And then he loses. He's in rags and he loses his health, and then his friends come and say, like, well, you must have done something because all this stuff happened to you. But we're given the full picture. We're given the full picture that there's a lot more to the story than just what Job was seeing and experiencing. Um, Now, it would have been tough to be Job. I mean, just like it's hard to be us when things happen to us. But I kind of see that as like a larger theme in this, that there's a lot that we don't know. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that's comforting. Well, maybe that's a little bit comforting, but that God has our best interests at heart, and that God, even if stuff is happening to us, that it's, there is some larger purpose, and there is, we're only seeing just the surface of things. And even that, I mean, we can't truly perceive even the things that we can see, we can't really process all of it. You know, we're only getting a thin slice of a thin slice of what is actually going on. And we have our own perceptions and biases about and assumptions about things. And just like Job's friends, you know, Job's friends had a lot of assumptions about what was going on and they had their interpretation, but it turns out their interpretation was just totally wrong. Um, so Job is a complicated book, and it's very deep, and it's but we're going to do our best, and you know, by God's help, the help of the Holy Spirit, hopefully we can see what there is for us right now, especially in this story. And I do think in this, and the reason I picked this actually was that it does fit with the theme that we're looking at, this God showing human like characteristics, or you know, of course we're made in the image of God, and you know, we're made to be relational just like God is relational. And you know, that's the first thing that struck me in the book of Job, is God being relational. And you know, why does God need this council of people, or not people, but you know, this council of, you could say maybe angels, or it's not very specific. Doesn't the Hebrew, is it like Elohim or something? It's um Heiser, I think it's Heiser. Heiser wrote The Unseen Realm. He does a good explanation of what exactly the language is trying to tell us. The original language is trying to tell us here, but it, you know, it could mean angels, but it means something. God created some sort of council in which, you know, God is, it seems like, is holding court and making decisions. You know, God is still making the decisions, but there's some reason why God prefers to do things this way rather than just act, you know, just act alone, I guess, without any sort of, you know, why did God create us to begin with? I mean, that would be, because it does seem that God desires relationship with us and with other beings as well. And
Well, he held this court, and no, I thought this holding of court was to make a point of the adversary's position in the
mm,
whole heavenly realm.
right, right.
Uh, uh, no matter what, Satan is still one of God's minions, and uh, and God was allowing that to be shown. Uh, no matter what, Satan is going to be subservient to God. And he may not want to admit it to himself, uh, but that's the truth of it. And I think that's one of the reasons we see this in Job. Um, I know that Job is at least purported to uh, be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, book in the Bible. Uh, uh, in the Hebrew, it's poetic. Uh, so it lent itself to um, uh, memory transmission. It came from before the time of written texts for the Hebrew. Uh, um, we see God allowing Satan to act in the human realm. So we are finding out here that Satan is being given permission. Uh, why? Uh, we don't
Well,
know.
do you see it as that, we are kind of the primary audience for this? So it's almost like showing us God's character compared to the character of the adversary. It's giving us that contrast of, God desires relationship and desires the best for us, but then you have this other force. It's almost like it's there to give us a glimpse um, into the intent that, not that we have any confusion about what, Satan's intent is for us, but it does kind of show this, almost reads as like a bitterness or like a jealousy. And I know the Bible doesn't necessarily go into great detail about why Satan rebelled against God. Uh, but I believe we were talking about the Book of Enoch and works like that, and it does seem like the point of contention kind of started with God's love of humans, and there was some sort of jealousy or pride involved, and that caused, because he was one of the higher ups, right? I mean, initially, before he fell, before he was cast out, he was a
As
important guy.
far as we know,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, it's uh, something which we won't know about this side of heaven.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, one of these days, we will be privy to that. Uh, it comes down to, uh, there is another side, and for good or ill, uh, God allows the adversary to act in this realm.
Well, like with Peter, right? That, Jesus told Peter, Satan asked me to ask for you to be sifted as wheat, but I mean, Jesus knew that Peter would come back and that he wouldn't be totally lost, totally lost forever, but that he would deny him 3 times and flee the scene and all that. I
but
almost see it as that. I mean, Job at the time didn't know what was coming his way. He didn't know what was coming down the pike for him. But I mean, at the end of the book, he certainly, I mean, he lost. I mean, he does get another family, but he did lose his family, and he did go through a lot of pain and suffering. Um, but his I see that Job grew in his relationship with God and his faith and all of that and his understanding. What one kind of tough thing about the book of Job is that Job's growth in his understanding and relationship with God and his, all of that comes at the cost of, a lot of people, and it could be, again, it could be poetic language, the numbers, but I mean, a lot of people die in this book
Yeah.
because, that's a big objection that people would have in reading this, because like all his employees get killed pretty much. And, God doesn't necessarily do it directly, but Satan, or the adversary, as we call him here, kills the family except for Job's wife, which is interesting, but
Yeah.
don't really know what happens with her after that. But maybe she was counted as being part of Job, being like the same flesh, so to speak. Maybe that's why Job's wife was spared. I don't know. I've kind of always wondered why she's around later on and tells Job, curse God and die.
Yeah.
But his kids get, his kids were in a house and the house crashes down, and I mean all this stuff. So a lot of people, anyway, a lot of it's not just Job that's
Terrible
suffering
things
through
happen
it,
to Job.
Yeah. So it can't be all just for Job's personal growth in his relationship with God, or could it? I mean, because what about all those other people? It's kind of a question I've always had with this book. Uh,
I I think that Job is given to us to help us understand that it is important for us to remain faithful no matter what.
yeah,
Uh, to impress upon us our mortality and help us understand that things may get absolutely terrible and still be within God's will.
and I find it interesting that, and relating to our theme also, that it shows the book really shows God's authority and sovereignty, but it also shows how it shows how we're very different in being a human versus being God, but it also shows how it does kind of portray God in a very human way, or, I guess uh,
Yes,
certain
it does.
traits like, the relating, and then, emotion, as we'll see.
It's it gives us a view of God that that most people would not think would make it into the scriptures. It does not put God in a very favorable light for someone looking on and wanting to believe in God. Uh,
Now,
a God like
as
this,
yeah,
um, a God like this is a little scary.
now this
Uh,
is something to kind of be brought up, and I don't know how much we've really mentioned this because we've been in the Old Testament for a long time. and will still be in the Old Testament for a while. But how much Job lived before the time of, I mean, Jesus always existed, but the actual incarnation of Jesus as a human and his crucifixion and rising from the dead and the new covenant, the age that we live in is very different. The New Testament age is very different than the age that Job was living in. And the way God related to people and the covenant relationship God had with humans. I mean, Job was probably before Abraham, I
Yeah.
believe. Yeah. So that was before that covenant. So it would have been the Noah covenant that Job was under. So kind of this general sort of, I'm not going to destroy the world because people sin sort of thing. But, Job sort of had this. I mean, Job had a relationship with God, at least to the extent that God noticed him as a person who was seeking to try to understand or to try to live in a way that was in line with what God, I mean, Job went to great lengths to try to not be prideful and to try to, he
Yeah.
prayed and he offered sacrifices. And so I'm wondering, I don't see Job's story, the way it's played out here, happening today exactly. It seems like this was a very, we are supposed to see ourselves in this story, but also keep in mind that this was a different time. This was a different covenant that he was under.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much, I guess, how much we should see ourselves in this story and how much the fact that we're under a different covenant plays into how we should take it. And I know that's kind of a weird question to ask, or that might not be an easy question. I guess that's not an easy question to answer. But often with these Old Testament stories, I do wonder how much of this applies to us, how much of it, I mean, we're obviously given this story for a good reason,
Well,
but
I think it all applies to us.
Yeah.
I think it is important that uh, we remember that, that this could be us.
Yeah.
Uh, um, and it's, it supports the concept that the Hebrews had that, if you had stuff, you were a godly person.
Well, that was the assumption that the friends kind of had, right?
Right.
And
Uh,
the interesting thing is, it's kind of half true. I mean, it's not completely true because Job was blessed, but he also lost everything at the same time. So it's kind
yeah.
of,
It's something that we need to remember that
yeah.
uh, um, that the absolute worst could happen to us, and it is important that we still remain faithful to God. I
And
think
it
that's
is,
one of the reasons that we have this book in the Bible.
and it is interesting that the blessings that Job receives come directly from God.
Yes.
But God kind of, I guess, works through the hardships that Job received. God does not kill Job's family. You, Satan did that, you know.
Right.
Satan killed his family and his servants and all that.
Satan was permitted to do that.
Permitted, yeah, but God still worked through that. Just like I guess Jesus didn't want Peter to. Jesus allowed Peter to go through what he went through and worked through it, but
But Peter needed to do that. It was important for Peter's growth
yeah,
uh, to do that. Uh, Peter would not be uh, the character in Scripture. He would not be the apostle that we have come to know without having experienced what he did. Uh,
and I guess what I was also trying to say might be that you kind of see this theme of Satan trying to, and I'm guessing in the case of Peter, as in the case of Job, Satan tried to separate them from God, or did his best, perhaps. How did he not know that why would he have the illusion that he would succeed in doing so? But also, I mean, it does seem like God always wins in the end. God is able to work through whatever the adversary does, um, and put it towards. In the case of Job, Job grew, and the I guess Job's friends gained something from this too, and then we're gaining from this story that Peter became the leader that he needed to be. Um, God was able to work through these experiences. I guess I guess it just shows that what was Satan actually trying, or was he I guess ultimately, like you were saying, he's still under God's dominion, under God's control in a way.
yes, indeed. And I do think that that is important for us to see is no matter what, Satan is not and never will be a winner.
But I do wonder why he even, or maybe he's required to try. I mean, it almost seems like God lets him try, or know. But
Well, we get back to what is free will?
right,
Uh, uh, Apparently, God gives all of his superior beings free will. Uh, because Satan had the free will to rebel.
yeah.
Uh,
I guess
I
just
think
like the other members of the council here had free will to be there or not, and
I think that's an important lesson for us. Is it is always our choice to follow God or not, and it is important for us to remember that no matter what happens here, God is ultimately in control. Whatever time we have here is short-lived in respect to eternity, and uh, uh, Satan is not going to win.
And this is kind of a other thing that I noticed in this, and it's his response to God asking him where, basically, what have you been up to? And as I understand it, the angels that submitted to God and were like Gabriel and so forth, I mean, they had free will, but they would go wherever God sent them, and they kind of had a mission and a purpose. They were. It kind of struck me as interesting that uh, the adversary or Satan's response in this is, you're like, well, I've just been kind of doing whatever I want to do, wandering around and causing trouble, and it's just I don't know. I just was kind of struck by that, and then you had these other sons of God and so forth that showed up, and then you have Satan kind of wandering in, and but even though it's almost like he has this, he has free will. I mean, they all have free will, but it's almost like there's this impression that he's his own master, but he's not, you know. Uh, if that makes
Uh,
sense.
it's it's important for us to understand that God God is and will be always in control. Uh, uh, and it has been that way since the very beginning. Uh, and I think an over an overall lesson is that we always have a choice. Uh, and it's important that we remain faithful to God. And it's been that way since Noah. It's been that way all along. Uh,
Well, it's interesting too that Job also kind of asks, the book of Job kind of also challenges us with the question of, there are a lot of people who can follow God if they know that they're going to get a sure reward immediately, and things are going to go well. But it almost like it goes to the deeper level of what's your real motivation for following God. Are you following God for, I mean, God likes to bless us, of course, but are you following God for the blessings and the good things here and now, or are you following God for the relationship?
uh, we see that no matter what, Job appreciates his relationship with God. Uh, he is always faithful, no matter what. And showing us that from the earliest of times, there were people faithful to God. Um, it's important for us to know, and particularly now with the way the world is currently, it's important for us to remember that no matter what happens, God does love us, and Satan is the loser. Uh, that's going to come about. It's the way reality is. And no matter what, we should not give up on our relationship with God. Because Job goes through some absolutely horrendous things, but he never
Yeah.
gives up his faith.
Yeah. Very true. So this will be an exciting book to go through, and I don't know exactly how many episodes we will spend in Job, but at least a few. And there's going to be a lot to look at and a lot coming our way.
Yes, indeed.
Any other thoughts on this before we? If so, if you have any additional ideas that come to you later on in the week, write them down for sure.
Will do.
So yeah, remember that God is always in control, and that there is a much larger picture. There is a much larger reality. I mean, that is reality, but much more than what we can see. We can only perceive a certain amount of it in this form that we are in. And there's an element of faith and trust, of course, that God desires a relationship with us, that God desires our best, what is best for us, but that might not necessarily look like what we think is best for us, if that makes sense. Because of course we like comfort, we like blessings, we like good things. And I think the book of Job, even though it's very deep and it has a lot of questions get raised, I think it does kind of do a good job of having a balanced view of things for sure. And the question too of God desires a relationship with us, but why do we why do we desire to draw close to God? Is it for the stuff, or is it for what is our motivation? Is it for a desire to have a deeper relationship with God and to grow in that? So those are kind of some applications and questions we'll leave with. And as always, thanks for listening. And we will continue on with the book of Job next time, most likely continuing in Job chapter 1. So we hope you have a good week and take care.